Hi everyone, and welcome back to season 3 of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. Today's guest is someone I followed for a really long time on LinkedIn, and so I was super excited when she agreed to come on the podcast. Safee-Naaz Siddiqi is a lawyer based in South Africa, a knowledge management consultant at Cliff Decker Hofmeyr Inc., and the founder of LawCoach, which aims to bring AI and lawyers together. In this episode, we firstly start by discussing where her interest in law began and the experiences she's gained from working in different types of firms over the course of her career so far, from some of the largest law firms in South Africa to working in Allen & Overy in their Johannesburg office. This episode was recorded before the news came out that office is now going to be shutting down, but I think that her experience still provides a really valuable insight into the working practices across the world of the same firm. We also discuss how and when she came across the power of AI in law and how it's inspired her to start LawCoach so that other lawyers can benefit from the powers of AI in an ethical manner. And finally, we also discuss how she keeps up with the latest trends and advancements in the legal tech space and how you can too. This conversation was just such a beautiful combination of sharing knowledge, practical advice on working with AI as a lawyer, and just good vibes all around. I loved speaking to Safee and learning all about what she is doing, and I'm certain that you will enjoy it too. Just a quick request before we get into this episode. I'd really appreciate if you could give the podcast a follow and a rating on Spotify, as it really helps us reach other listeners. Without further ado, I really hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll see you right at the end. Hi, Safee, and welcome to Commerce Meets Law. Really excited to chat to you today and talk about all of your journey and also talk about tech and AI and law. So before we get started, we always have a bit of an icebreaker on the podcast. And your question is...
I feel like I should be nervous.
No, I promise it's hopefully a nice and easy one to get us started. But in your opinion, what is your superpower?
My opinion, my superpower is probably my ability to jump from between things, which other people call ADHD. And I think it has been a bit of a blessing and a curse at the same time, but it sets me apart from other people, and I've learned how to capitalize on it. So yeah, ADHD.
Definitely. And I guess for a lot of people who are listening who whether it's ADHD or other neurodiverse conditions, I think that it takes a while to be comfortable with that and to be confident
Yes.
in the abilities
Yeah.
that you get alongside that. So could you share a little bit about sort of, were you always very confident about it, or did you sort of grow into that?
So I was relatively lately diagnosed. I was diagnosed when I was 19. It's something that happens in a lot of ADHD women from what I've researched because
Yeah.
school is so easy. You pick up things really fast, and especially in women, it presents not in a hyperactive way, but in an unfocused way. So you're not disrupting, you're not causing trouble. Your teachers don't pick it up. Maybe they go, she daydreams or she talks a lot, but girls are chatty and they daydream. And so as long as she's getting straight A's or even a couple of B's, it's fine. So I finished school in South Africa, we call it matric. So I finished matric with straight A's and no one thought there were any issues. And then I started my law degree, and that's sort of when the dynamic changed completely. I found that I couldn't just wake up in the morning and write the exam and be fine. I needed to study for it. And then when I started studying, I realized that I couldn't study. So that's how the diagnosis happened. And that means, so I'm 33 now. I've been formally diagnosed for my entire adult life, and that has been incredible. A lot of people I know struggle with the fact that they're not diagnosed, so they haven't had the opportunity that I have had, which is essentially to model my life around the fact that I'm ADHD. So if somebody is ADHD, or if they suspect they might be ADHD or have any other neurodivergent condition, I think it's very important to realize that the system that we have is designed for neurotypical people, and it is going to take some work from you to cultivate a to cultivate a system that works for you within this neurotypical system. And if you can do that, you will find ADHD or whatever it is that you have, is a superpower. You might need medication. You might need to be mindful, but there are things that you can do that that neurotypical brains can't do. So for example, I can hyper focus. I can do an hour's worth of work in 10 minutes. Or well, that's an exaggeration, but I can do a day's worth of work in an hour. And that is something that is incredible, but at the same time, a task that takes a neurodivergent person an hour could take me a week. So it's, it's a bit of a toss up. And if you learn to capitalize on it, I think that you can make it your superpower.
Definitely. I think it's that idea of sort of, working with that rather than working against it. And I think that, until you learn how to work within the system, like you said, it's very difficult to be able to recognize that as a superpower. Talking a little bit about, I guess, taking a couple of steps back before we talk about what you do right now, can you tell us a little bit about sort of growing up in South Africa? What were you, what kind of person were you as a child? What were you sort of interested in at the time?
What I was interested when I was 5 years old, I announced to everyone that I was going to be an actress. So I was going to be a star. I was going to be winning Oscars. I was going to be on that red carpet. I was going to just take South African couture to the next level and showcase South African designers. I was going to be Miss South Africa. I was just so in a nutshell, both my parents are entertainers. In South Africa, they're on radio, they're on stage. My dad was a writer, so he wrote plays, he wrote songs. There were always musicians around us. I've actually had the pleasure of meeting because they're within the Indian community. Because of that, I've met lots of Bollywood artists. So that's the community that I grew up in, and that's what I thought I was going to do. I modeled my life after my parents, but very soon I realized that wasn't practical for various reasons. One, my mother told me it wasn't practical and that I wasn't going to make much money from it. She didn't want to dash my dreams. She was just like, you're not going to make much money. But at the time, I mean, I was 5 in the 90s. So we're talking about the 90s, early 2000s. There weren't very many people in Hollywood that looked like me. I can't think of a single Indian or South Asian actress from that era. So I kind of went, well, there's no scope for me there. And that's not really a sob story. It's just all the realizations happen when you're young. And then I got to a space where I started meeting lawyers, female lawyers, and I thought they were incredible. We had a neighbor that was a lawyer, one of the women who my mother regularly interviewed on her radio show and gave legal advice, lawyer, and she kind of took me under her wing, and that's sort of where the idea formed. But otherwise, yeah, entertainment first love.
I love that. And I think so often we see sort of, that path of tradition, that traditional profession, your parents are in like that sort of era and then you sort of go into it.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, if you sort of want to, be a bit rebellious and go into the entertainment side. Whereas in your story, it kind of seems the opposite, which is really interesting. And what did you like about the lawyers that you did meet? What qualities did you see in them which you sort of wanted in yourself?
I have to say that is a fantastic question, and it's not something that I've thought about, but I would say that, they were confident. They could articulate themselves. They could help people. They could solve problems. And they would walk into the room with such an amazing aura. And not all lawyers could do it, but these were the women that I had met. They just had this aura, and I thought, I see myself. I see my future in this. This is the future I want for myself. I want to be that kind of woman. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with whatever other kind of woman there is on the planet. But I just saw that and it resonated so deeply with me. It was around the time Charlie's Angels came out. So Destiny's Child was like, independent woman. I'm gonna be an independent woman. I'm gonna have attitude. I'm gonna have grace. I'm gonna look good. I'm gonna be smart. I'm gonna make money. And that is, those aren't quite qualities, but it was very much how I, as a child, saw the lifestyle. And that's really what I saw more than their qualities. It was the lifestyle that I had envisioned for myself at the time.
I absolutely love that. And I think that that is one thing that a lot of people do think about when they go into the legal profession, whether it's the suits or whether it is like watching other
Yes.
legal dramas or reading books. And, you sort
Yeah.
of imagine that high flying corporate legal lifestyle. When you kind of decided, you
Yeah.
wanted to go into it, you then did a law degree. Can you tell us a little bit about your university experience and, any challenges that you faced whilst you were at university?
So you already know about the one challenge, which was discovering that I was ADHD because I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
quite study. And that's really where the make everything fit you, not the other way around, happened. I was not great at going for lectures. I tried, but I would zone out. It was absolutely pointless for me. My method, which up to today, if I'm writing exams, is what I would do, is to rely heavily on deadlines. That is a strategy that I know a lot of people use, but won't necessarily confess to it. And that put a lot of strain on my body because it's not easy to cram for a law exam. You're trying to study a semester's worth of work a couple of maybe 2, 3 nights before, if you've got time, sometimes the actual night before. And so, but at the same time, getting good grades was important to me because I wanted to work at great law firms, and it is incredibly competitive as it is across, in any jurisdiction in which you practice. So I put a lot of pressure on myself in short bursts of time, and that very much affected my physical health because it's tough to be just for 3 weeks every 6 months to just be surviving on Red Bull and air and not sleeping because you don't just write one exam, you're writing 5 or 6 at a time. So yeah, that was tough. But I through that experience I learned a lot about myself, and that I don't necessarily prepare in advance, but the fact that if I plan, it's just a little bit better. I mean, give myself 5 days instead of 2 days, I can accomplish a lot. So, yeah.
And I think, would you say by the end you sort of figured out like a formula or a way that ensured that you weren't feeling burnt out either during or before exam season? And if you can you share it with us?
Well, I know what the formula is, and by the time I was done with exams, the adrenaline was just, there's so much of dopamine. It felt like I'd ran a marathon, so it's always pretty amped. Um, But my study method is to look at past exam papers. I don't know if it works across every university, but you get a pretty decent idea. Even if you're using 10 years worth of them, is fine. To kind of get an idea of what it is that's being tested, even if it's not necessarily the elements of a contract that gets tested every semester. You might get to see that this lecturer likes to ask questions about the essentialia of whatever it is that you're studying, or maybe this particular lecturer has a style of giving you a very a seemingly complex question, but it's the facts are entirely the same as the locus classicus. So your job is to remember the legal principles. So you get an idea of the lecturer, you get an idea of the kinds of questions that are being asked, and then you tailor your study plan around that and don't look at anything else. There's some exams. So uh, I studied international relations via the University of London, and the exams are set by the London School of Economics. And so I looked at those past papers and I saw, okay, cool, there are 10 sections in this module, and they will ask, I think, 5 questions. So I need to only learn 8 sections to get, and I need to answer. They'll put in 5 sections, and you've got to answer 3. So I can't remember the exact maths now, but it was like, how many? What is the maximum amount or minimum amount of sections that I need to learn in order to ensure that I'm prepared to answer any of the questions? And I think it was 7 or 8. So I just ditched the 2 that I didn't like and focused on the ones that were easy. So my entire thing for exams has always been to reduce the scope of work and just roll down on that. And then your method depends on you. My method is to write and rewrite, and then summarize, highlight, and listen to music while I do it. And if I can find somebody who is willing to let me tutor them, that's always great. So it's not something that I did once I left university, but in university, there are a lot of people who said to me, thank you so much for teaching me this section. But actually, I was just tutoring because it was how I learned. So yeah, pro quo vibes.
Yeah, I love that. And there's that, combination of the work smart and, ensuring that you're not
Yes.
just, you're studying with a plan. You're not just studying for the
Yeah.
sake of it. And I think, when you start university, it takes a while to learn a new
Yes.
method, a new system, especially moving from school. I think that for a lot of people listening who are from the UK, can you just give us a little bit of sort of, I guess, whilst you're university in the UK, in second year, you're kind of applying for vacation schemes and training contracts, and if you want to go down the solicitor route. So, what was the system like for you for applications, and were there any significant differences between the system in South Africa and UK?
So I will tell you what our system is, and you tell me because then I get to learn about the UK system because I'm not familiar.
Yeah.
So what we do is that we go to university. It's a 4 to 5 year degree, depending on how you structure it.
Hmm.
And it is a professional degree, so it's not like the States where you have to do pre-law or whatever. You don't need an undergrad degree
Hmm.
first. You used to, but then they changed it. Just straight, you get your degree, then you do 2 years of what we call articles. And during your articles, you are a candidate attorney, which is exactly what it sounds like it is. It's like you're a candidate to become an attorney, which is the equivalent of your solicitors. We also have advocates, which is the equivalent of your barristers, and they do something called pupillage, but I'm not going to talk about it because I never did it, never been interested in it. So with articles, that's a really competitive process to get into. There are vacation work programs, and that does increase your prospects of getting articles, but it's not necessary. However, pretty much most big law firms in South Africa tend to have vacation work as a prerequisite. Most of the time we get paid for it. So it's not really, it's about 2 weeks and you get paid and you learn, and you have your interview at the end and they decide to keep you. In my case, it was a little different. I had fairly decent grades. And I was at a conference for, I don't know if you guys have the Golden Key. It's supposed to be an international honor society, but how international it is, I don't really know.
Uh-huh.
So I was at a Golden Key conference because I was on my committee, my chapter, um, and I met someone from Adams and Adams who was just giving a talk on. It wasn't a law conference, but they were there and they were just talking about high achievers and so on and so forth. And I went up to them and I said, I would totally apply for your for articles with you guys, but I don't like your online web application. Am I going to have to do that? Because they were talking about applying via, and the woman said, no, send me your CV. And I sent her my CV, and then I had vacation work, and then I had my articles. I wanted to be an intellectual property lawyer at the time, and Adams and Adams is the biggest IP law firm on the continent. Potentially at the time, I think it was the biggest in the southern hemisphere, but I could be wrong. There was in my mind no other place for me, but I was still like really stubborn and take my CV. Hello. Which, by the way, as a side note, having a little bit of a unique personality, the thing that makes you you, a lot of the time law students don't do that. They think we're going
Yeah.
into this big place. I'm lucky to be here. But if they're hiring you, if a big law and I can't speak for the smaller ones because I don't know them very well, but if a big law firm is prepared to hire you, you probably have a lot to offer. So don't sell yourself short. Like, yes, you are lucky to have that opportunity because very few
Hmm.
people do, but you worked for that opportunity. So own your space. Like you're good. Just don't get cocky, but don't sell yourself short.
Definitely. I think that imposter syndrome kicks in so often, especially when, for a lot of people, when they start there, whether it's a training contract or it's the
Yes.
first corporate job, it's maybe the first time they've ever walked into an environment like that. And so, they may have gone through rounds and rounds of applications, and
Yes.
in the rational part of them probably knows that they're here for a reason. But the
Yeah.
irrational side sometimes takes over, and I think that we have to
Yeah.
constantly remind ourselves of that
100%.
for sure.
100%. Yeah.
And that's really interesting in terms of the process. So I guess here, there are a lot of similarities in the sense of it's again a 2-year training contract, but I think the difference being that you rotate doing 4 6-month seats as a norm within a particular law firm where you get your training contract. And then if whatever seat you sort of enjoy the most, and obviously they are ready to have you in there, you then qualify into that seat. So whether that's IP, whether that is private equity, or any of the other seats. In terms of, from what I understand, you kind of went into the litigation side at Adams and Adams. So can you tell us a little bit about their litigation practice and sort of why you decided to go down that contentious route?
So, funnily enough, we do not all law firms here do rotations, just
Mm-hmm.
by the way, but we do rotations as well. Adams did do rotations. And I started off in the trademarks litigation department and it just didn't feel like the right fit at the time. I had a fantastic mentor. I swear by mentors, I had two fantastic mentors in my first year.
Yeah.
I was incredibly lucky. Um, and just through conversations, both of them were litigators, so they did inspire me. Um, and I just thought it was such a dynamic environment where things were
Mm-hmm.
always changing and it was highly strategic, and you weren't just looking at the law, you were also looking at the facts and you were dealing with the emotions of the other person. And so I thought, this just sounds really exciting, and this actually is what TV law is. So I went and just like, cool, let's do that, let's try it. And then I got stuck there for 10 years. So that's what happened. Yeah.
I think that, and as you say, firstly, mentors I think are so important. They've been so important in my journey. And I think that for anyone, having that relationship with people and building that over time and, not just taking from them, but also giving back, I think that, it's got to be that two-way street. And I think sometimes when you're at the start of your career, you forget that, you think you don't have anything to offer. But I think it's important to remember that it definitely goes both ways. Can you tell us a little bit about when you were at Adams and Adams and you had a long stint at the firm, sort of what a day in your life looked like and what kind of things you were getting up to?
Little baby lawyer. So a day in my life was that I would wake up in the morning, I would go to the office, I would literally work the entire day, and work could be anything. I was running off to court to file papers. I was trying to convince the clerks at court to do me like a solid because that was a skill. That every I don't know, again, I don't know about the UK, but in South Africa, if you're in a litigation department, you better know how to get the clerks to do you favors because you're always going to need one. um, so that was the court work, and then the consultations. That was my favorite part: the consults, the meeting the clients, actually discussing the cases,
Mm.
um, listening to the experts, helping come up with arguments. And then there was the stuff that I hated, which was the photocopying and the handwriting, the page numbers on court bundles, and following up with people that were ignoring your phone calls. Like, guys, I over here we have a sheriff, and for court process, the sheriff takes the court issued document and serves it on someone to institute proceedings. And in my experience, they ignored me a lot of the time. So I would just there was like a dedicated window every day just for follow-ups. And oddly enough, I still have a dedicated window just for follow-ups. I don't always have to follow up with people, but having a little list of, okay, I've sent this across, they need to give it back to me.
Yeah.
It's been so yes, as much as I hated it, it's now given me one of the most useful tools that I have to organize my life. And then I was probably working until at least 8 p.m. every day. This is a minimum of 12 to 14 hours a day. And I worked Sundays as well. And then I would go out with my friends who were also little baby lawyers at the time afterwards and eat dinner. So university was surviving on Red Bull and air. Articles was surviving on crackers and cream cheese and air. Yeah. Oh, and Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola. It's really
Some similarities, some things changed.
a little bit.
And I guess the next sort of part of your journey, and as we were talking about before, you mentioned that when you moved to ENS, which was South Africa's largest law firm in 2016, that taught you a lot about the law and the legal profession. So can you tell us a little bit about what you learned during your 3 years there?
So I learned, firstly, that I was capable of working 48-hour days without crashing. I don't know if I still can, if that was just me in my 20s, but there was that. I learned the art of working under extreme pressure. So um, they are known as being a particularly tough law firm, but they have fantastic work, fantastic clients, fantastic lawyers, and you're working insane hours, but you're learning at a rate that cannot be, in my opinion, that cannot be replicated in a lower pressure environment. You just won't
Yeah.
learn that fast and you won't pick up the same skills. So whether that's dropping everything. I remember one of the last instructions I had was on a Thursday afternoon. My then superior came to me and said, "Can you do this report? It needs to be in by close of business Friday. Here's all the documents. Good luck." You can't say no. Um, and yeah, it went in, and it was one of the, he wasn't the most, he didn't drop compliments on me. Let's put it that way. He was just, he was not that guy. I think that I was just happy when I didn't get feedback, like cool. That means he was happy with it. But that time around, he was genuinely happy, and I I don't think that it was a journey for me to get to the point where I could turn around something that looked like it took a week to do overnight. And that's what I learned, how to deliver really high quality work, but in a very short space of time, or at least relatively short space of time.
And as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about, I'm sure you've seen this debate on social media, especially with a lot of young professionals, of on the one side having this sort of, hustle culture and constantly grinding, and
Yes.
people sort of, or on that side of being, is that
Yeah.
is that toxic productivity? Should we be promoting that? Sleep when you're dead, all those kind of things. And then on the other side, there's the argument of, when you are in your 20s, most
Yeah.
people have the time where, they don't have significant responsibilities. They have the time and possibly more of the energy as well to be able to learn. And that really is that growth phase, because it's the first time you've stepped out of full-time education. Where do you stand on that from the journey that you have had in terms of where people should be in their 20s?
Journey. I don't think there is a way that is right and wrong. It's going to be what works for you. It can be incredibly
Mm.
taxing. I mean, I have no regrets, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't emotionally, mentally, and physically taxing for me to do what I did in my 20s. It was
Mm.
just a decision that I made, and one that I made consciously. Ultimately, you will have goals. My goal at the time was to master my craft. And so that environment was great for me at the time. You might also just have goals to go, I don't need to master my craft in 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, whatever it is. I'm going to do a slow burn, and that's okay. Or you might see it as this is the most money I can make with
Mm.
I'm comfortable doing this work, and this is the most money I can make doing the work that I'm comfortable doing. So I don't care if I get promoted. I don't care what happens. I'm gonna do this, and then just go and pick a place that speaks to that. The one thing that I will
Mm.
say, and I know it is not unique to South Africa. I know that my international peers feel the same way, is that there's a huge difference between a law firm that expects you to work really hard and really fast and really accurate, and just the expectations are here. There's that. And then there are law firms that leave you traumatized because you are being bullied or because you are made
Yeah.
to feel less than. And so when we're talking about toxic environments, I don't necessarily think having to work 48 hours a day is a toxic environment. That is just the expectation. Everyone goes through it. What is a toxic environment is if a senior professional doesn't give you feedback, but then at your performance review tells you you're really bad at this. I mean, well, we just went the whole year. Why didn't you tell me then? Or there's a friend of mine has really struggled with, I'm treated like this and she's treated like that, and why is there this huge discrepancy? So there are things that are certainly toxic, but working hard is not one of them. Working hard is very much a choice, and you can that's just the expectation. It should, however, never be an expectation that you accept abuse. There is the expectation, and you might go, well, this is what I have to take to get there, but I do think that that's where reform needs to happen.
Definitely. I think, thank you for highlighting that, because I think there's, a really, really fine line between those two. And like you say, expectation can be different and for each person, how much pressure they want to put on themselves and how many hours they do want to work is an individual thing. But I think that, everyone can agree on the fact that a toxic environment cannot mean abuse of any sort, or feeling like, you are feeling belittled in any sort of way. I guess the next point in your journey that I want to talk about was when you moved to Allen Overy, or A&O Sherman now. What was, I guess, that sort of global firm culture? How was that different to what you had experienced before in terms of the culture and sort of the working environment?
So ENS has quite a few offices in Africa. So there was cross-jurisdictional work that we did, but A&O was at the time, or at least my experience of it, maybe other people at ENS had a different experience to me, but A&O was a lot more integrated globally. So there was just a lot more cross-pollination between the teams. And that was ultimately the idea. I think that they've got access to fantastic technology. And I think their pool of talent is massive, absolutely massive. I didn't have the pleasure of seeing the London office. I think that would have been really exciting. I was supposed to, we were in talks and then it didn't happen. And I think it might have been because of the pandemic or something around that. We were in
Yeah.
talks, and then yeah, there was, so mine was the Johannesburg office of, and it was a cool experience. It wasn't the right space for me.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was necessarily because it was international. I think that surprisingly, I think that your team dynamic is the most important. And I don't have anything unpleasant to say except that it wasn't a fit. And as you know, I am all about whatever the opposite of square peg round hole is. I am really focused on just finding new spaces that works. And that was one of the experiences that sort of taught me that I actually do have to be quite militant about how I enforce that value, because it makes a huge difference to your mental health and your motivation levels and whether you feel like going to work in the morning. So yeah.
Definitely. I think that, whilst you're younger, or even throughout your career, it's so important to have experiences that teach you actually what you do value, because you're not going to find that out until you try out different things. And some things can work and some things can't. And, it may work for you and it may not for someone else. And I think that, having sort of those ideas and having that in mind also probably strengthens the older you are, and, the more experience you've had as well.
For sure. The one thing though is that I wish someone had told me at the time, that sometimes it's not you, it's the environment,
Yeah.
and sometimes it is you and not the environment. So yeah, it can be it can be, especially when you're accustomed to sort of doing A, B, and C, and there's this new experience, it can be quite the existential crisis when it's not working out the way things have worked out for you in the past. So I would sort of say that it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It's just so important to recognize when something doesn't work for you, and to not judge it, to just accept it without any judgment whatsoever in relation to them and yourself, and learn what you can, and then move on.
Definitely. And I think that it's a nice segue into talking about all that you do now, which is all to do with AI and law, and obviously a topic and a kind of a buzzword that everyone is talking about right now. So
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit about when you first came across that intersection between AI and the law, and what really captivated you about it?
So I just love learning stuff. I'm just obsessed with learning stuff, and I'm always interested in the latest tools, productivity hacks. I've always been, for obvious reasons. Well, not for obvious reasons, but I think it's because of the ADHD. I'm always trying to find a system that makes my life more organized, easier. You know this now from study techniques. I like to do as little work as possible to get the best
Yeah.
possible outcome, and so
Hmm.
AI, I mean, I'd used e-discovery and other, not generative AI per se, but other AI platforms like Relativity, which might actually be Gen AI. I'm not 100% sure now that I think about it. But I'd use platforms like Relativity for e-discovery, and I just saw how AI made life easier. So when ChatGPT came out, I needed to try it. I think it came out in November 2022, and
Yeah.
I started using it around January 2023, end of December, beginning of January. So within a couple of months. And at that point, I kind of went, okay, this thing is pretty awesome, but we need to see what it can actually do. Number one. Number two, at that stage, I was the head of my department, and I needed to see what it could do, because I knew that the junior lawyers were going to be using it, because it didn't surpass my expertise, but it far outstripped the expertise of most juniors that I had worked with respect to them. It is a robot that has been trained on
Yeah.
all of this data that they haven't, and it retains it. So fair enough. And so I needed to trial it to understand its limitations. That was my initial sort of thinking. How can it make my life easier, and what limitations does it have, so that I can ensure that I'm not caught out by my juniors using it in a way that implicates the practice in a negative way. That evolved very quickly. I became obsessed. Anyone who uses and gets into AI will tell you that it is, especially at the time, it was really addictive. Like, what can it do? What can't it do? And it was evolving. There was every version that was coming out, and then it was Google's Gemini, and then there was Claude, and just so many things happened so quickly
Yeah.
that you couldn't keep up. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that it was going to become like the internet and Google and your smartphone, and it's just, to me, it's already ubiquitous. I can't see that there is any, call it large, law firm in the world where people within that law firm aren't using AI, whether their bosses know about it or not. There are people in their firms that are using AI, and they're probably using it so well that people can't tell. So yeah, that's kind of it. And then practically, I was learning about AI in relation to my practice and myself. But the more I used it, the more I realized that everyone could use it and everyone could benefit from it. In South Africa, we have a problem with access to justice, and it is something that I'm sure is replicated in, perhaps not all, but most jurisdictions where
Yeah.
poor people don't have access to justice at the same levels that wealthy people do. And to me, AI bridges that gap in a way, not as a replacement for legal advice, but as a way for lawyers to spend less time doing the work. If I need to explain to my client what the discovery, which I'm told is disclosure proceedings in the UK, if I need to explain a rule of court or some kind of procedural matter to my client, that the AI can generate something that is highly usable, and it might be 2 pages long explaining it in extreme detail, but instead of me thinking about how I can explain it in a way that is simple enough for my client to understand and that covers everything at the same time, and then checking the draft and proof editing the draft and so on and so forth, I give the AI my base notes, so the relevant procedural rule and the commentary, and I say to it, I need to update my client. This is the kind of information they need. This is the kind of language I need you to use. In South Africa, we use British English. Please give me a draft in British English that is this long. And it'll generate something that's highly usable. Of course, it would be completely irresponsible to just then forward that on to the client. But within about 20 minutes, as opposed to 45 minutes, you now have something that you can send across. And that's not to say that you didn't know the answer to the question. It just means that you didn't want to spend the time thinking of the format and the structure and the language that you use, and then proof editing it for typos. It saves you time in ways that that then reduces your fee. If, like me, you're the kind of lawyer who really does want to make your fees more affordable and just generate more value for your clients. Yeah.
And for the skeptics out there, for those who are maybe, or slightly playing devil's advocate on my part, because I personally think
No,
that I
do
think,
it. I love
AI
talking
is going
about
to be
it.
so revolutionary. But what do you think are some of the risks with allowing
Sure.
junior lawyers or even anyone in the legal profession using AI, and how can
Yes.
they be sort of prevented?
So the number one risk with juniors in particular using AI is that they don't necessarily have the expertise and the knowledge to know when AI is wrong. So AI will churn something, call it the court process thing. It will say something, I will read it. I've been dealing with court process for a decade. I take one look at it and I'm like, what are you talking about? You're saying it's 15 days. It's actually 10 days. That's silly. And I make that change myself. If you're a junior lawyer and if that information doesn't live in your head and if you're not being really conscientious about cross-referencing what it tells you, if you're just inputting work that you're inputting source material that you don't necessarily understand, that you haven't read, you're taking AI's word for it when it gives you a draft and you're not really sense checking it, the risk of you getting something wrong is massive. The way you count, but, and this is the big but, it's law firms are going to struggle because I don't think that they're going to be able to prevent their juniors from using AI.
Yeah.
It is, you have it on your phone. There's a Chat GPT app. If you've got a personal, you can kind of ban it on all the work systems, but you've still got it. You've got a personal phone. You've got it on your cell phone. You can use it at home on your personal laptop. There's just so many. Everyone who's ever been a teenager knows how they can break the rules without getting caught. Just period. I think we all have learned in life that it's
Yeah.
not necessarily about rule breaking, it's about getting caught. So what is very important is to teach junior lawyers, like you said, the risk of using AI in a way that, or the risks associated with using AI, and ensuring that they understand the impact it could have, number one, but number two, empowering them to actually use it in a way that mitigates against the risks. So don't just say, don't use it. They're going to use it. Don't just say these are the risks, because they don't necessarily fully, well, some might, but in a lot of cases, they're not necessarily going to appreciate the consequences of the risk. So they're like, cool, I know this could happen, but then if that happens, then what? People, and it's not just junior lawyers, a lot of people just don't think that far ahead. If they want to use it, they're going to use it.
Yeah.
Showing people that this is step one. This is how you instruct the AI. This is what its limitations are. This is what AI bias is. This is what a hallucination is. This is how you use the relevant, like Westlaw or LexisNexis or whatever it is, to check the accuracy of the information. Don't use it for research. Don't use a large language model for research. It is a large language model, not a search engine. Teach them what it is and empower them to use it properly, because it's unavoidable. They're going to be using it. It is your job to then ensure that they use it properly. It's very similar like with data privacy, and this is broadly, not just within the context of law,
Yeah.
where you are required to train people on how to treat personal data or
Mm.
personal information, because they need to understand what to do, not just be told what not to do. That was a very long answer, but I can't stop talking about AI. I never get tired.
I think that, and it's so important. I think, like you said, as we start the conversation talking about, working with something rather than against it, it's that
Yes.
same concept here
Yeah.
of, like you said, people will find a way to use it. So
Yeah.
banning it is definitely not an option, especially when we know that the value of it and, the kind of the spread of it is only going to grow over the next couple of years and even more so over the next couple of decades. And I guess, talking about empowering laws, I really wanted to talk about LawCoach and I wanted to talk about, your idea behind it. So the whole idea about it, is of empowering lawyers and empowering them to use AI. So can you tell us a bit about what kind of gap is LawCoach trying to fill and how do you help clients better use AI in their day-to-day profession?
So when I say I use AI for everything, I don't think there's a day that goes by where I don't use it. It's an impossibility, and I use multiple platforms. I've got a lot of experience using it and a lot of practical experience using it. I have taught other people how to use it. Before I started
Mm,
Law Coach, I would just teach people, friends, colleagues, whoever wanted to know how to use it. The thing that I've discovered with AI and obviously I just have a lot of experience practicing law. It's going to be quite difficult for somebody who's not a lawyer trying to teach lawyers how to use AI because there's a very
yeah.
specific thought process. There's just specific things that you do at law firms and expectations that we all have. So that's really obvious. Then there's the divide. There's what is this thing, and it is scary, and it
Yeah.
is not to be trusted. And I think there's something. It's from Harry Potter actually, where Ron's dad Arthur says, "Never trust something if you can't see its brain." Like
Hmm.
where things like Voldemort's. Basically, I'm saying AI is Voldemort's diary. And I think empowering people to use that is very important, and that's a huge gap. Lawyers are, by definition, either skeptical, and if they are skeptical, they're not going to use it, or
Yeah.
they're not skeptical and they're convinced that they don't need any help with it whatsoever. That I can guarantee that there are senior partners at many huge law firms who will tell you, I don't need I if I want to use AI today, I could train the AI myself. And so I'm trying to bridge that gap between the skeptics and the know-it-alls and just go, there is a practical element here, and I'm here to show you if you want to be shown, because some people
Hmm.
don't. Yeah. And
And
that's not
sort
to
of,
say that you can't learn it yourself. Just sorry.
yeah.
By the way, you can totally do it by yourself. It just takes it takes investment because you've got to learn how to talk to it and how its brain works. It's brain that you can't see. So, yeah.
Definitely. And I think, it's that idea of it being a black box and, a lot of what goes inside it
Yes.
we don't know. And I think that, those kind of things will be discovered over the next couple of years. But I think for now, that perhaps is what causes a lot of that skepticism as well. In
Sure.
terms of on a practical level, how do you facilitate, do you sort of work with clients on a one-on-one basis? Do you work with law firms in their entirety? How does that sort of work?
So I do run seminars. Those are very much
Hmm.
introductory. So this is what AI is. These are the risks. This is how you use. This is how you engineer a prompt and how you engage with it in an iterative way and how you refine your results. And this is what you need to consider. And here are some exercises that we can do together. And it's very much it's just a really easy introductory course that everyone can do. And I limit it to 8 people per seminar because you really need the engagement when it comes to AI. But by and large, I coach people one on one because everyone has a different requirement. So the idea is to work with you to ascertain your needs within your specific practice and then find a way for AI to work for you. For example, I have worked with a client in the past who does not need AI for research or contract drafting or anything complicated. They're like, I just need help with marketing. Can you make AI market for me? And so yeah, we work together and we come up with things like a marketing plan and how we're going to structure your content, and then how we're going to instruct the AI to get you the kind of content that you need that is still consistent. And it's very, very niche stuff. And if you're not working with someone one-on-one, or if you're attending a seminar, you're just not going to get that. You're going to get the bigger picture overview.
And if there is a lawyer listening who perhaps wants to get started on their own for now, just getting started with AI and how they can, maybe they use it in their day to day for, recipes, but they don't yet use it on their, as a lawyer, what kind of apps and things would you recommend for them to get a good head start?
So there are three that I use most regularly. Obviously, ChatGPT, I mean, it's the OG of all the AIs. Great place to start, just to have a conversation and understand how it works. Like I said, what its limitations are. Claude is absolutely fantastic when it comes to drafting in a very specific way. And lawyers, I mean, that's what we do. We draft quite a lot. So that's always quite helpful. They are both creative. So it's worth keeping in mind, like I keep saying, that it is not a search engine. It is a large language model. But the last one is Perplexity, which is effectively a search engine, and it gives you sources with the answers that it gives you. So if people haven't tried it yet, I would strongly suggest Googling something and then inputting that exact same query into Perplexity and just checking out what the results are. Starting point wise, identify what it is that you want, and then go on to Perplexity and say, I have this issue. I'm looking for a freely available AI tool, or an AI tool that offers a free trial to help me deal with that issue. And it will tell you where to start and what you can have a look at. So that's a great place to start. And then once you've selected your tool, just work with it. It's not going to give you the perfect answer immediately, because you're not going to give it the perfect prompt immediately. You're learning how to give it better input and instructions, and it's learning what you need from it. So work with it for about a week or 2 weeks. Ask it, like, how can I give you better instructions? How can I give you better prompts? We've now got to this point. What, through an iterative process, could we have gotten to this point if I had prompted you differently, and how should I have structured my prompt? Have conversations with it. You really don't need a coach. A coach is just sort of like a hack where you just bypass all of that and you jump on top of it. But if you've got time and if you've got the inclination, then it's probably the best investment that you can make at the moment. And the best part is that it doesn't cost money per se. It just costs time.
Definitely. I feel like we've already started like a mini coaching session. I love it. And just before we get into our rapid fire, I guess you keep up with a lot of the latest trends and advancements, and AI is moving so quickly. If you had to make three, let's say three predictions for the kind of the three biggest changes you think AI will make in the legal profession, that we sort of keeping it specific to lawyers, what do you think those changes would be just in the next couple of years?
So I think change number one is that the kind of work that lawyers are doing is going to change, meaning that lawyers are going to be doing higher quality work as opposed to lower quality work. So all the repetitive tasks we're not going to be doing those anymore. Number two, because of that, lawyers who use AI are going to outpace lawyers who don't. So the more advanced your AI skills are, the more likely you are to progress in your career at a quicker pace. And the reason for that is because you are utilizing a tool that takes you to the next level. It's like the lawyers who embraced email versus those who decided that they were just going to stick with post. The lawyers who decided that they were going to master the Google search, as opposed to those who just stuck with textbooks. So that is the change that's going to happen. And then lastly, and this one's going to be a little bit on the bold side, I think that we might be seeing the end of the billable hour.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and the reason for that is because AI is going to speed up tasks. So your value is not necessarily going to be in the amount of time that you spend doing the task, but your
Mm-hmm.
expertise. So if someone comes and asks me to draft a contract, I'm not a contracts lawyer. It's going to maybe with AI and the brain that I do have in my head and sort of the experience that I've got, it's going to take me 3 hours to get something together. A great contracts lawyer is who doesn't use AI, who's going to do a highly bespoke contract. It's probably going to take them roughly the same amount of time. So what then separates me and this person, right? It's their
Mm.
experience. So what is the value of her contract versus my contract, her experience? And if she can then do that in an hour as opposed to 3 hours, she shouldn't be charging, or she's not going to be charging less. She's just going to say, it doesn't, if you want my services, you're going to pay me this amount of money and you're going to get this contract. And if you don't want to pay me that, go to someone else, take their substandard contract, have at it. Yeah.
That's super interesting. I've read so much about the fact that the billable hour can potentially be changed with AI, and I think that it's going to be such an interesting development. I definitely think that with the legal profession, I think that it's known to not it be a little bit averse to change in terms of having that transformation. But I think that AI is definitely here to stay, and so that change I think is going to happen. Whether it happens in the next couple of years is maybe a slightly up their prediction, but the next decade I think for sure that we're going to be able to see that.
Lawyers can be as traditional as they want to be, and they can dig their heels in as much as they would like to dig their heels in. The market will dictate what
Yeah,
lawyers do. So
definitely.
if again, same example as the contract, if I can go to a person who is going to give me something that, and they're going to give it to me quicker, and sure, maybe it's AI, I would be completely honest with my clients and say, I'm going to use AI to generate this
Mm.
contract, but I'm going to proof it, but I'm going to use AI. I can give it to you for half the amount of money as the next person, and I can give it to you twice as fast. What
It's
would
a
you like?
win-win. Yeah,
100,
yeah.
100%. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think remembering that, ultimately that, you're at the service of your client and what the
Yeah.
client wants has to take priority. And so, like you say, if it's in the market and there are other people who are competing because they're using AI, we sort of know that it's going to head in that direction. I think that's been a really, really interesting conversation. We always finish off with rapid fire. So the first question on your rapid fire is, what is the best advice you have ever received?
That's a tough one, but the best advice I have ever received is from my mom. I'm a really blunt person, and she said to me that I should learn how to tell people to go to hell in a way that they look forward to going. It's quite impressive, but my entire job, at least thus far, my entire job had been persuasion, and so it was always just something that stuck in my mind. It doesn't matter what you say, it's how you say it. So.
I love that. We haven't yet had that on the podcast, so that's a really, really interesting one for sure. The next one is, if you had to name one book which has had a very sort of a significant impact on your life, which one would you say it would be?
So it's not. It's a little bit. It's not. I wouldn't say it's embarrassing. It's a little bit cliche. But when I was
Mm-hmm.
17, I read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And it's not necessarily a book that I would love now, but as a 17-year-old, it absolutely changed my life and the way I thought about things. And also, not necessarily in the power, not destiny or whatever it may be, but in kind of knowing your dream and just kind of going for it and just throwing yourself
Mm-hmm.
into it. So yeah, The Alchemist.
I love that. And final question is, what are the top three travel destinations on your bucket list?
So, I mean, my favorite place in the world is and will always be Bali. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I would love to hike the Andes, and I would
Ooh.
love to visit the Barrier Reef in Australia, and then the Northern Lights. So it doesn't matter where I see the Northern Lights, or whether it's Alaska, or whether it's Greenland, just to see them. It's more the stuff that I would be doing in those regions than the
Yeah,
place. Yeah. So Northern
I
Lights,
love that.
Coral Reef, Andes Mountain.
I love that. Spoken like a true lawyer, you had your track list, your goals, it was right there, all laid out. But with that, Safi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such an enlightening conversation. And I
Thank you
think that,
so much.
we've discussed so many sort of diverse topics and I think we've covered so much ground. So thank you for taking out the time and talking to us.
It's an absolute pleasure. You're a fantastic host, and I'm very excited to keep listening to your podcast.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and a massive shout out to Safi for taking the time to come on the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or found it valuable, please do let me know your thoughts by emailing commercemeetslaw@gmail.com or by DMing me on Instagram at commercemeetslaw. We also have a YouTube channel and TikTok by the same name, so if you want extra content, definitely do check those out. For now, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you very soon on the next episode.